Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I am the festival director of Out on Film, Atlanta's LGBTQ film festival. We are having a spring mini film festival the first week of April, and one of the amazing films that we are showing is the extraordinary documentary Loving Highsmith, which is a look at a novelist, Patricia Highsmith. I am so happy to have the director here to talk to her a little bit. Please welcome the director of the film, Eva Vitija.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
Thanks so much. I so love this film. I cannot wait for our audience to see this. I guess first off, what made you want to make this documentary?
Actually, I just first thing I did is a bit plunge into her diaries and notebooks, which are stored in an archive in Switzerland, where I'm based. So this was a bit the start of it all, I think. And the texts were for me so interesting because they were so different to everything I had read about her before. Not only was she a totally different person than I had imagined somehow, or the impression of her through her personal diaries was so different than all I knew about her. Because, in Switzerland, everybody knew this old grumpy cat lady living in Switzerland, secluded somewhere in the Ticino, which is the Italian part of Switzerland. I think she was pretty famous in Switzerland as well. But everybody knew her from this old age image somehow, and
Yeah.
of course from the image of being a crime writer somehow. And then I discovered a very young, very enthusiastically falling in love all the time,
Yeah.
young Smith, which really touched me in a way. And I think this was a bit the motivation why I wanted to do the film as well, because I said, how's it possible that somebody can, or somebody's image can be so different to what I actually encounter when I read her texts as a young woman. And then I started to research her girlfriends, which were the most important for my film.
Exactly. So, you obviously, in terms of doing your research, you had a lot of material there. I mean, how did you decide what all you could use versus what you didn't have room for in the film?
Yeah, of course there was, it's like 8,000 pages of unpublished text that you really have to decipher sentence by
Uh,
sentence, which is quite which was quite some work because the handwriting is not so easy in the beginning. Um, but I actually had quite a clear focus from start, or as I was developing the project, it was clear that for me this whole private life, this whole love biography in a way, is the thing that is still not really out there.
yeah,
One talks about Patricia Highsmith. It was still so dominated by this image of the crime writer that I thought this would be the new reading of her for my film somehow. So the focus was quite clear, and I had to excerpt all the texts from the unpublished writings, and I just took what interested me regarding those topics of
exactly.
her love life, also about her writing, of course. She writes a lot about her writing as well.
Yeah.
So I thought these were a bit the two main topics that I looked for. And then I just, excerpted the whole thing. It was about 300 pages. And during editing, of course, was the long, long process of choosing the 20 pages that it is in the film in the end.
Exactly. As you mentioned, I mean, she's so very well known for Strangers on a Train, The Talented Mr.
Mhm.
Ripley. People do sort of refer to her as a crime writer, but there's so many other layers to Patricia Highsmith that I just did not know about. Can you talk about, focusing on that and really shining a light on her personal life and talking about there's just so much more to Patricia that I did not know about before I watched this film.
Actually, I think everything is a bit drenched by her private experiences, all that she wrote, although it's very, very decoded, or it's really like secret. If you read her, you wouldn't realize that it's so influenced by her private life. But as soon as you realize that everything is private somehow,
Hmm.
and or influenced by this own experiences by her life. So I thought this is a very important, new way to read her as well, to read her old things. But I think in general, she's very well known for a few novels that are, of course, also they are in my film, like Strangers on a Train or the Ripley series. They are very important. They were also very important for her, and she was famous for them, but also in her oeuvre in general, there is a lot of other things as well. There's lots of short stories that are not even maybe published, or a lot that are published but not so well known, and which are really depicting a bit another style as well, where she was more free to use a style that she wanted to, that was not influenced so much by mystery, or she never saw herself as a mystery or crime writer,
Yeah.
which I totally agree on, because she wasn't.
Yeah.
She just wrote the books about violence as well, or violence was always a topic somehow, or guilt was always a topic. So there was, of course, obviously some crime in it, but it was not really the typical detective crime writer, of course.
Exactly. She was a lesbian at a time where it just rolled it really, accepted by society, which drove a lot of her, personal life and professional life. I mean, she wrote the Price of Salt and had to use a pseudonym. But can you talk a little bit about, being a lesbian and having to really be so discreet as she was back then?
I think it really formed her and formed her writing, because there's lots of topics that come from that biography, I think. As for example, leading a double life was something that was completely normal at the time,
Yeah.
if you were lesbian or homosexual in general. So I think that she was really also able to see those things in society, even if it was not directly always connected with being homosexual or so. She always, had a feeling of facades and what is behind, or double life or abysses of society. Somehow she could really relate to that from a personal standpoint. And it's a very interesting, I find it very interesting that somehow I always felt she lived her homosexuality very freely.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, everything was in the closet at that time,
Yeah.
and she was afraid. She was afraid that she could lose her career. For example, she wrote Carol, and she
Yeah.
was very fond of it because it was also autobiographically influenced.
Exactly.
And she felt really like it was a relief to write that book. It also went very well, the first draft, very quickly, the first drafts.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, she was terribly afraid to publish it. But it was not only her, because also I think it was her agent that told her, if you publish this under your name, you will be dead afterwards. And it was just after she had started her career with Strangers on a Train, and she had kind of a good start with that. So she didn't want to ruin all of that, and they decided on a synonym. How's it called? Sorry, now the word is lacking. A pen name. They decided on a pen name together. So she chose Claire Morgan, and then she didn't have. It was only in the 90s that she published it under her own name, even though she was asked before. I think it was in the 80s, in the beginning of the 80s, that a lesbian publisher took over the rights of Carol, and they asked her to publish it under her own name, and she didn't dare yet. She was also offered some more money for publishing it under her own name, but she didn't dare yet. So she waited until I think, when was it, 92 or something?
Yeah.
That she published it under her own name, because it was already, I think there was quite some rumor that she had written it, and she had to put an end to all the piracy around it.
Exactly. But for the longest time, and not a lot of people outside of her little professional world knew that she wrote this. And and again, the Carol is known. But yeah, can you talk about the fact that she wrote this masterpiece that was so wonderful and legendary in especially the LGBT community, and no one knew about it other than her little world?
I think in the lesbian world, it was very well known that she was Claire Morgan.
Okay.
And all lesbian that I met knew at some point. It's not all, but for example, Mary Jane Meeker, who was a writer herself, she knew that Patricia Highsmith was the writer of, or she thought she was Claire Morgan somehow when she met her, and she was a big fan of the novel already. But for example, Monique Buffet, she had no idea when she met her in the 80s, beginning of the 80s, that she was a lesbian, for example. She had, of course, as everybody else, read Carol and was also a big fan, or The Price of Salt, it was then called.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a huge fan. And but she only later, even after she had met her, found out that she was the author of this. So it's difficult to say who knew it, who didn't know it. But I think outside of those circles, really nobody knew it for a very long time.
Exactly.
I think what is so legendary about this novel is that it really breaks the borders of the lesbian genre at that time, because it, didn't have the usual bad end of
Exactly.
a lesbian experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What do you have a favorite Patricia Highsmith work?
Yeah, actually, I think my favorite novel, besides many, many short stories, which I really love, is This Sweet Sickness. And it's about a man who falls in love with or has a short relationship with a woman. And it ends very quickly. And then he imagines the whole relationship. He even buys a house, builds a house for them together. He even imagines that they marry it, etc. And I think for me it was so interesting because it's about imagination, and this is a bit the life of a writer. What else do you do than imagining things? And this similarity between love, where you imagine all kinds of things when you meet someone in the beginning, and writing, that was very interesting for me. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that there was just so much about her life that you could have talked about, and you had to obviously limit it. But you mentioned that there's some extras in the DVD that you actually shot in Alabama, which is near Atlanta. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, actually, it was pretty interesting that in the biography there was a very short, only a short part that talked about her family,
Mm-hmm.
her Texas family. She grew up in Fort Worth, Texas,
Yeah.
but her family came from Alabama, and they came from Coates Bend, Alabama, and from a big plantation actually. And we, of course, found this very interesting. Went there to shoot, and found this old, huge, very typical Southern cotton plantation mansion,
Mm-hmm.
and found out that her grandfather had still, probably not her grandfather, but her great grandfather still grew up with a lot of slaves. So the whole village, which is pretty small, had the same name, but part of it was colored and part of it was white. So, or black and white. So that was very interesting for us to see, where did she really come from. It was not only this Texas culture, but
Mm-hmm.
it was also this Southern plantation culture. And I think it relates a lot to her topic of guilt as well, I
Yeah.
suppose. I had always thought that this guilt topic only came from her, feeling guilty being homosexual, because you're not accepted, etc., etc. But I think probably there was another kind of guilt
Okay.
feeling in that culture as well, probably.
Okay. When Patricia left the United States,
Mm-hmm.
what did that do for her, both professionally and personally?
Actually, she was never, as a writer, much accepted in the US, but she was very well received in Europe.
Okay.
It was a bit the time that all young Americans went to Europe to travel, and
Mm-hmm.
she did that very early on. And she was a great traveler in all her life. She traveled a lot, so she went to Europe. I don't remember how old she was actually now, but really early on. and she just loved Europe and the probably a bit more open-minded culture that was there at the time. So she stayed the first time, I think, in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And she lived for a longer time, she lived in England.
Mm-hmm.
And from England, she went to France, where she lived more than 10 years or so until she came to Switzerland.
Okay.
And in France, she was very well received. And I think she was not so much sold as a crime writer. She already had a broader image as a writer as well. She was very respected, and there was a lot published. And she had a lot of friends in France, so she loved to be in France, actually.
That's great. This film has had such acclaim all throughout the world, and congratulations on that. What are you working on next?
I actually just produced a film that had its premiere last week. So this was a bit what I was working on the last half year.
Okay.
It's a film about asylum hearings, something completely different, but an
Okay.
important topic. A film by a young director called Lisa Gehrig,
Okay.
and it premiered in Copenhagen. So, and I'm still in research for several topics actually. And one is about the picture agencies. This is why I'm in Paris right now.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of press picture agencies there that had been bought up afterwards, and yeah, it's an interesting start.
Okay, great. Final question. What would you say is what is Patricia Highsmith's legacy?
I think she had this very unique universe in her writing,
Mm-hmm.
and I really admired her for, putting everything in her life a bit below the writing. It's really, she was some kind of for me, she was a bit of a female hero, because she lived through a lot because she thought it was important for her writing. And I really think she did. She did even cultivate sometimes the difficulties in her life for her writing. And that I really admired, because it was not always so easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think she has different I think for lesbian culture she's very important, but also for other genres.
Sure. The film Loving Highsmith is extraordinary. It plays at Allen Films Spring Mini Festival on April the 5th at 5 o'clock at the Midtown Art Cinema. It's a free screening, and this is the Atlanta debut of the film. So please come out and watch it. Eva Vitija is the director. Thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you so much for making this fascinating documentary. Obviously, we look forward to your future work.
Thank you very much for having me, and have fun with the film.
Thank you so much. You have a great rest of the day.
Bye bye.